Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Marine Estate Management Strategy webinar on Initiative 2, Delivering Healthy Coastal Habitats with Sustainable Use and Development. My name is Thomasen Knight, and I'm a Community Engagement Officer for the Marine Estate Management Strategy, and I also work on implementing the Marine Estate Education Strategy. It's a pleasure to be hosting this webinar this morning. And soon you'll be hearing from a range of multi-agency, multidisciplinary presenters on work that's being done on the Marine Estate Management Strategy Initiative 2. First of all, on behalf of the Marine Estate Management Strategy team, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians on the lands on which we're all meeting today and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and all Aboriginal people with us on the call today. For me today, I'm calling in from Wonnarua country, near the Hunter River, but I hear it's still tidal at this point, and it's tidal all the way up to Patterson, I believe. Aboriginal people hold a deep cultural and spiritual connection to the sea and the land, and I'd also like to acknowledge all the care that they've given to sea country and country for many, many thousands of years and continue to do so to this day. So welcome. First of all, we're going to get a Marine Estate Management Strategy overview. The Marine Estate Management Strategy is large, vast, and we often refer to it as MEMS. So if you haven't heard that term before, that's our acronym for the whole strategy. As I said, you're going to hear from a range of presenters today, multi-agency, multidisciplinary, and that's really representative of the whole strategy. It's big, it's vast, and there's so much going on. After we get the MEMS overview, we'll hear from James Wraith, who is the initiative lead for Initiative 2. He'll give that overview. Initiative 2 is one of 9 total MEMS initiatives. After James's overview, we'll go into projects where we'll hear from a number of different presenters, and then we'll wrap up the session. So a little bit of housekeeping. Today, unfortunately, we don't have time for a dedicated Q&A, but what we'd like you to do is submit a written question at any time via the Q&A function, which should be at the top of your screen. After you've submitted that question, our presenters will be able to get back to you in written form, and all audience members will be able to see that response as well as the question. Post-event, we will send out PDF presentation slides as well as a recording. So before I pass over to our presenters, I'd just like to let you know I'm going to introduce them by their names, and they will by themselves introduce their roles and their organisations and how it links to the MEMS, and then you'll hear from them on their projects or perhaps the overview. So first of all, we have Susan Crocetti. Over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, Thomasen. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. So my name's Susan.
Oh, it's just looking. Oh, yep, it's up now. Susan, go for it.
Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, my name's Susan Crocetti. I work, I'm a Principal Policy Officer in the Marine Coast Estuaries and Flood Branch in the Environment and Heritage Group within the Department of Planning and Environment, and I'm the Program Leader for EHG's delivery of the Marine Estate Management Strategy. So really happy to be here today to tell you a bit about MEMS. So we'll start with the basics. So what is the marine estate? So New South Wales has the most populated coastline in Australia, with 82% of us living close to the coast. It's got an incredible diversity from the subtropical waters in the north down to the temperate waters in the south in terms of that coastal and marine species. And when we think about, when we're talking about what is the marine estate, it's all of the waters of the New South Wales coast. It extends from Queensland down to Victoria, from the high tide mark out to that 3 nautical miles offshore. It includes the shorelines, the submerged lands, tidal rivers, creeks, coastal lakes, and estuaries. So the Marine Estate Management Authority is a single authority to oversee and provide advice to the New South Wales Government on the management of the marine estate. Their vision is a healthy coast and sea managed for the greatest well-being of the community now and into the future. This means a marine estate with clean and safe waters, biologically diverse and resilient ecosystem. It's accessible to the community to maximise economic, social and environmental benefits, and where key community benefits are maintained and enhanced for current and future generations. So don't try to read the detail on this slide, but some of you will be familiar with this. So the statewide priority threats for the environmental assets and the social, cultural and economic benefits were determined through the 2017 statewide threat and risk assessment for the New South Wales marine estate. All of that's available on the website. Threats that were high are red, moderate are orange, and that they're red when they were across all 3 regions. So the state was broken into northern, central and southern New South Wales. And these priority threats were those that were deemed to require action under the Marine Estate Management Strategy. You can probably also pick up some brown cells in there, and those ones are the ones that are a mix of moderate and high, and these were also picked up. So statewide priority threats were also determined not just northern, central and southern, but also for estuaries and then open coasts and marine. So climate change, for instance, is a top 5 threat for environmental assets and also in the top 10 threats for social, cultural and economic benefits. So the left is environmental and on the right is the social, cultural and economic threats. So the Marine Estate Management Strategy is a 10-year strategy to address the priority threats. So it's taking those threats and turning them into actions. So it's broken into 9 management initiatives, 53 management actions, and close to 100 individual projects. The strategy has secured long-term funding for the first time, which is fantastic for everyone, till 2028. So the strategy, which is to the end of its 10 years. The implementation plan describes the projects, the partners, deliverables, timeframes for delivery. So you can check that out on our website for the 2022 to 2024 period. That's the current one that's being implemented. And the strategy is cross-agency. It includes key New South Wales government agencies, Department of Primary Industries, Department of Planning, the Environment and Heritage Group, the planning bit of the Department of Planning and Environment, and Transport for New South Wales. But also we have lots of partners, including lots of you, local government, Crown Lands, other key agencies. The Marine Integrated Monitoring Program sits along the strategy to monitor condition and trend and to fill those key knowledge gaps and assess the effectiveness. And it's a true collaboration across all of those MEMA agencies and partners. Once again, a lot of detail here, but this is really just to demonstrate that there's a really a significant governance structure all the way from the projects, and there's a line of oversight all the way up to the 2 ministers principally responsible for the Marine Estate Management Act. And along that way, we get input from the Marine Expert Knowledge Panel, which is the independent panel that provides advice, and through various working groups and experts. So we have our 4 agencies, then we also have MOUs with a number of other agencies that you can see there. But we also have a lot of stakeholders that we couldn't deliver the strategy without. So really pleased to see lots of people have joined us today to talk a bit more about Initiative 2. So just where Initiative 2 sits in the 9 initiatives, you can see what some of the other initiatives are. So there's obvious linkage and crossover between all of the initiatives, and we all work across with each other and across delivery. So today we'll be learning about Initiative 2, delivering healthy coast habitats and sustainable use. Hopefully some of you have been able to attend the other webinars for Initiative 1 and Initiative 3, and there's also a second Initiative 1 coming soon. You can also go and interrogate this on the website. There's close to 100 projects being implemented from 2022 to 24 in the implementation plan. And this map just sort of shows you that it's across the state. And we provide for every 4 months, we provide a snapshot report that you can check out that gives you an update in terms of the progress of those projects. So there are legislative links between the Coastal Management Act and the Marine Estate Management Act, upon which both are bound. And we understand coastal management programs are a focus for local governments, focused on estuaries and catchments. The strategy is focused statewide, and it's designed to reduce those statewide priority threats, of which there are 50 identified in the strategy, but was developed to do this in a way that fills current management gaps. It acknowledges that there are many agencies and organisations working to reduce the range of threats facing our estuaries, coasts and oceans. Management of coastal hazards is a key point of difference and is the responsibility of local government. A key benefit of the combined approach of councils and state government is that there's more collaboration on all aspects of estuary, coast and marine management. The work is intertwined in some aspects. So, for example, a statewide framework or policy or strategy can inform a coastal management program, or a coast and estuary management in a local government can achieve better environmental outcomes, which helps improve reducing threats under the Marine Estate Management Strategy. So the links between those two it's really quite site specific and can be explored in more detail at the local scale and by regional staff. So that's really it. So please pop in any questions in the Q&A, and I am really excited to be listening to presentations for the rest of the morning.
Thanks, Susan. So over to James Wraith now.
Thanks, Thomasen. Just let me know when that comes up.
Yes, looking good.
All right. Thank you all for attending today. It's a pleasure to be able to present to all of you. I'm kind of provide an introduction, but really the exciting business happens when the project leads get to talk about the work that we're implementing in the strategy. But my name's James Wraith. I'm a DPI Fisheries Senior Manager. I'm speaking to you from Darwall country. My role is the Initiative 2 lead. I'm also the co-initiative lead in Initiative 1. Initiative 2 is one of the large initiatives in this strategy based on funding, scope, and number of staff. You'll hear from Initiative 2 project leads that come from 4 separate New South Wales government agencies, including water, planning, fisheries, and Crown lands. These leads consult and coordinate an even broader spectrum of stakeholders, including local governments, which is essential as the issues we're addressing in Initiative 2 are highly complex. The reason for Initiative 2 is fairly obvious. People in New South Wales are deeply connected to the coastal environments. Vast majority of people in New South Wales live within 50 kilometers of the coast with access to a broad range of the triple bottom line benefits the marine estate provides. In some cases, there are deep-rooted conflicts around access and use of these benefits. There's no question the ongoing demand for these resources and their benefits puts pressure on the health of coastal habitats. So my role as Initiative 2 lead is one of a program manager, coordinating implementation of 13 projects within Initiative 2 and 11 projects within Initiative 1. I coordinate risk and budget management, communications and engagement, monitoring and evaluation and reporting. I use these tools and employ adaptive management within and across projects in consultation with the project and program leads. We adapt to the times, which has been fast-paced in recent years. So we faced numerous natural disasters and more recently a change of government. Additionally, I consult the other initiative leads as well as complementary program managers to identify synergies and coordinate delivery that maximizes the benefits for everyone. Let's see if I can get my next slide here. There we go. So in terms of Initiative 2 program plan, some of the threats that were identified in the statewide threat and risk assessment, which Suzanne touched on, which preempted the development of Initiative 2, include foreshore development, modifications of waterways, altered hydrology from dredging and entrance works, drainage works, and manipulation of freshwater inputs to estuaries. To tackle these issues, we set forth with a program plan to protect and enhance the health of the marine estate using a multi-pronged approach, which includes on-ground works, development and updates to decision tools, and research to fill knowledge gaps. We use these short-term to long-term goals, which you see on our screen, which give us direction, as well as provide a baseline for measures of success. In the short term, paraphrasing some of the information there, we set the scene for longer term improvements, improving governance arrangements, including roles and responsibilities across partner agencies. We also improved our understanding of key issues and updated our best practice understanding through research, consultation, engagement. In the medium term, we are aiming to achieve results through better coordination amongst decision makers, improved efficiency, and better adoption of best practice, and results in pilot areas. Now, pilot areas is a key one in some cases where we're developing decision tools like policy and guidelines updates. You may see that to be statewide, but in other areas, we don't have the full amount of resourcing and funding to do everything everywhere, but we definitely look to share the results and realize the benefits to everyone as much as possible. And finally, the long-term goal, well, it says it all. Final slide here. The initiative has 5 management actions written into the strategy that guide development and delivery of the underlying MEMS projects, which you'll hear about next. You'll see this structure in the implementation plan. I encourage you to see that along with project descriptions, key partners, and planned activities or outputs. That's on our website. Generally describing the work being done under these management actions. Management action 1, you see there, the Crown Lands team is examining management and best practice of both commercial dredging operations and breakwater assets. Additionally, DPI Fisheries is undertaking a review of managed ICOLL systems, which can inform management guidelines and decision making. In Management Action 2 there, DPE Planning is undertaking a review of the coastal design guidelines, and Fisheries is developing policy to protect high-value coastal assets. In the third management action there, Crown Lands is undertaking a review of the coastal Crown Land guidelines, and Fisheries is developing a suite of map-based strategies for coastal areas that will inform and enable more consistent and efficient planning decisions to protect and enhance the benefits of foreshore areas. Looking at the fourth management action there, DPE Water is leading a multi-agency working group in a review of regulatory and non-regulatory frameworks and mechanisms that drive management of drainage coastal wetlands. Additionally, Fisheries is improving fish passage in priority rivers and estuaries. Finally, the fifth management action there, and this is where our projects all work towards delivering cumulatively to address each of these. DPE Fisheries researchers are leading several projects to fill knowledge gaps. So you'll hear more from these projects in the upcoming presentations. I'll leave it there, but please don't hesitate to reach out to me, whether it be here in the chat or in the future. Give me a buzz and we'll have a one-on-one conversation. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, James, and thank you, Susan, as well, to both of you for those overviews. We're now moving into the stage where we're going to hear from the project leaders, and we're going to hear from 11 of them. First up is Jillian Reynolds. Just before Jillian gets started, I just want to say the chat is disabled. It's the Q&A function you need to use to submit either a question or a comment. All right, over to you, Jillian. Thanks. Oh, you might be on mute, Jillian.
Yep, thank you. I'll share my screen and then I'll run the presentation from there. Just let me know if it comes up.
We've got the Prezzo in edit mode. If you just pop it on, that's okay.
Sorry, Thomasen, technical issues.
Okay. Technical issues, no worries.
Sorry, I can't
Do you
do.
want me to have a go at
but-
sharing for
No,
you?
you should only put into present mode.
Go. Yep,
Yeah, and now minimize that.
that one. Share.
Lucky you've got technical support on hand there.
Yep, it is very lucky.
Yes, looking great.
Okay, hooray. Okay. Sorry, thank you. Thank you. Apologies for the technical issues. So just to give you a brief explanation, for the purpose of the webinar, all of our projects have been grouped, and the first three are falling under the banner of entrance modification and dredging. So this is including ICOLL management project, the commercial dredging best practice, and breakwater management. So we'll just kick off with ICOLL management. So my name's Jillian Reynolds. I'm a senior fisheries manager with limited technical skills based in Huskisson office, which is Gerinja country. So I'm the project lead for this project, and I'm just assuming that most people in the room have an understanding of what an ICOLL is, but it stands for an intermittently closed and open lake or lagoon. So these are the coastal lakes which at different times are connected to the ocean via a channel and influenced by tidal flows, and at other times they're separated from the ocean by a sand berm where the prevailing rainfall will have a much greater influence. So this project evolved under Initiative 2 as MEMS identified the second highest threat to the environment is entrance modification. So each time an ICOLL is open to the ocean, this system undergoes a range of environmental changes and impacts, and the scope of this change will depend greatly on a whole range of factors. But the things that are impacted, it's you'll get a change in water quality based on the temperature, salinity, the chlorophyll, or the dissolved oxygen as well. There's inundation to drain, or can be draining of adjacent wetlands and fringing vegetation. There's a whole range of sediment movement and channel realignment, and there's changes in marine vegetation. So every time an entrance is open, it carries a risk of a significant adverse environmental impact as well. So something like a fish kill can occur. So under Initiative 2, there's an objective to address the risk by ensuring that entrance management modification is undertaken in a way that either maintains or improves estuary and marine habitat health. And as agencies, and I'm sure the councils know, we're receiving an increasing number of applications to artificially open these systems to address a range of management issues, and the reasons to justify these openings are broadening as well. Those reasons are not necessarily in alignment with the MEMS objectives, and so the ICOLL management program began. So the initial scope of our project is just to get an understanding of the current state of play. So how are ICOLLs currently being managed by different councils and agencies across the state? So to begin, we've undertaken an audit of all of the systems along the coast. The audit has gathered information from all the available entrance management plans, flood studies, the old CZMPs, REFs, and any approvals that we can find for each system. And we're looking to understand the current legislative pathway that's being followed. So are councils using a Part 5 EPNA for flooding, or are they saying, these works are being undertaken using the emergency powers of the Local Government Act? So we also want to know what approvals have been obtained. Did they, have you got one from Crown Lands, from Fisheries, from National Parks and Wildlife, or from Marine Parks? And we're also looking at the conditions and the triggers that have facilitated an opening. So all of this information has been collated. It is currently being assessed and incorporated into a report. So the report is also going to have a look at what legislative pathways are actually available within the planning framework and what approvals are actually required from the agency, and then the best way to go about obtaining those. We also are looking to identify any patterns or areas of concern in the management of these systems. So the report at this stage is designed to inform agencies, and so that we can identify what we can do better and what our management objectives are and what they should be for looking after these systems. So we're also developing some flow diagrams that we hope to be able to give out to council, which will show the most appropriate legislative pathway and the most appropriate approval pathway. So just as where we're up to, The audit is just about done. I think there's about 4 detailed systems that need to be looked into. We've looked at 148 systems across the coast, and 127 of those were ICOLLs, and then 58 of those systems are actively managed. So where a system is actively managed, a comprehensive audit was done, and this includes looking at how often the system's open, how those trigger levels were set, what the legislative pathway was followed, what approvals exist, whether they're current, and also if there's any known adverse environmental outcomes or sensitivities. So what we found so far is that the predominant reason that these systems are opened is for flooding. So this includes flooding to both private and public assets, and it also incorporates nuisance flooding of the foreshores. So the next one is water quality. So this water quality trigger is sometimes linked to actual measured water quality parameters. So it may be, you know, when salinity reaches a certain level, then the entrance is to be opened. Sometimes they're based on a community perception of the water quality, and sometimes there's a preemptive trigger. So they need to be opened just in case water quality does deteriorate because it's closed. So then the third primary reason for opening them is for a social reason. So they're open prior to holiday events to facilitate things like surf carnivals. And another one is to also change the aesthetic of the water. So to change it from that slightly green lake colour to the open blue estuary colour. So there were also a couple of random ones. There's one which is opened just because it's been opened every 12 months for a really long time. And then there were a couple as well that were done for navigation. So the next step is we've got our audit data. What we're doing now is we're working with planning to map the available and appropriate legislative pathways. We're also mapping the appropriate approval pathways with all of the permits and, you know, consultations that are required with all the agencies. And then we're going to take that information and complete the report into the management, and then we'll move forward from there. So as for the future, at the moment, we're not quite sure of what the next funding or resources will be, but all going well, we're hoping to develop some best practice guidelines for councils, and those guidelines are going to build on the form and function guidelines that EHG produced a couple of years ago, and they'll include guidance on the permissibility, on the permissible legislation and the approval pathways. All right, thank you. We'll move quite quickly. And next is Danny Bucher's going to speak to us about the commercial dredging and best practice. Danny.
Thanks, Jillian. I'll start by saying if anybody sat through my coastal conference presentation last week, I don't mind if you go for a cup of tea right now, because this is a condensed version of that with the exception of the last slide. So yes, I'm Danny Bucher. I work in the coastal unit of Crown Lands in our Ballina office, where together with David Kirby, we are responsible for delivering Crown Lands contributions to MEMS projects. Crown Lands actually leads 3 projects, and this particular one, the commercial dredging best practice, has really been conducted in 2 phases. A couple of weeks ago, we finished phase 1 with the release of the audit of commercial dredging and extraction on coastal Crown Land. So I just want to look at the key findings from that and how that's going to guide phase 2 of the project through implementing its recommendations and what that will mean for councils. Jillian's doing the sharing, so if you could move to the next slide, please, Jillian. So yes, as you've heard, there was a risk and threats and risk assessment, and it identified the impacts of dredging in all its forms on the estuarine environment as a priority threat. So one action to address this threat was to conduct an audit of commercial dredging. Now, estuaries are not just part of the marine estate, they're also part of the Crown estate, and we recognise that sand and gravel's not only extracted by dredging from coastal Crown Lands, but also by other methods such as scraping of beaches and dunes. There's a dragline dredge, and there's traditional pit quarries. So we included all of those to make it a audit of commercial dredging and extraction on coastal Crown Lands. Next slide, please, Jillian. And if you could just click the arrow once more, please, to do a little animation. There we go. So the first stage of the audit was to conduct an inventory of commercial licenses. So how many licenses, where are they, what are they extracting, how are they extracting it, etc. Once more, please, Jillian. We then looked at the assessment and approval framework for each operation, keeping in mind that many of them were approved decades ago, and so the conditions under which they operate may not address the threats to things like soil, sediment, water, sensitive habitats and other users of the land or waterway in the way that we'd like them to be addressed today. Next, please, Julian. So the other phase, the other arm of the methodology was to identify examples of conditions that do adequately address all of those threats. And once more, Jillian. And then to benchmark the conditions under which each operation was approved against those examples of best practice. And finally, Jillian, we come up with a list of recommended actions to get us to that stage of best practice. Next slide, please. And again. Once more, that's it. So what did we find for the, well, back one. So what did we find for the inventory? 26 licenses throughout the state. 13 of those are active. 10 of them are latent and haven't extracted anything for years. There's 3 that expired while we were doing the audit. One of those was active at the time and will be reactivated shortly. The other 2 join the list of latent operations. 5 of the active ones and the one that will be reactivated are either cutter suction or suction dredges in estuaries. There's 1 dragline dredge at Southwest Rocks, and the rest of them are land-based operations, scraping beaches and dune systems. There were 8 pit quarries identified, but they are all latent. And in terms of what they extract, there's about a bit over 1 million tonnes of sand and gravel theoretically allocated to active operations. But it turns out they only really extract about 1/3 of that each year. So there's a lot of latent capacity in the industry that is largely due to the scraping operations, while the dredges tend to be a little more close to their limits. Next slide, please. So the focus of the benchmarking exercise was really on the dredging side of things. So that's what all the not applicables on the right-hand side of the screen refer to. Green says that the conditions on the approvals comprehensively address the particular threat. Orange means it's partially addressed, and red means they're not addressed at all. And generally, you can see that in terms of managing sensitive habitats where they're present, we do a pretty good job of applying appropriate conditions. Likewise, with water quality issues such as turbidity from the dredging plumes, we've generally addressed those quite well. DC means it's addressed in the development consent conditions, CL means it's in the Crown licence conditions, and EPL means it's in the environmental protection licence conditions. Down the bottom, you can see management plans that require monitoring and reporting. It's a bit of a mixed bag there, but I'll come back to the red ones. And we haven't done a very good job at all of managing the hydrodynamics and morphology of the estuary or other forms of contamination. So they're the areas we really need to improve on. I'll just point out that big block of red there is actually 3 licenses to the same operator in the same estuary, and they only ever use one of those locations at any time. So we can probably condense those down a little bit and it doesn't look quite as bad. The other little red mark there on the last dredging operation, that's the one at Southwest Rocks, and it does have a navigational function to keep the entrance open as well. So that's why more hydrodynamics and morphology wasn't a big consideration when it was approved. And I'd like to point out the second last one is the one that will be reactivated shortly down in the Shoalhaven. And the conditions that are already on the development consent will turn all of those blocks green. So we're already having an impact on new approvals just by going through this process. Next slide, please. So there were 25 recommendations to get us to best practice. I'm not going to go through them in detail. The coloured blocks on the side indicate red as short-term, high priority actions, orange as medium-term, and yellow as sort of longer-term considerations. I've summarised those recommendations under 4 parts. First, part A is looking at the overall current assessment and approval process and how we communicate that to stakeholders. So there's a few roles there in collaboration, particularly with planning, to get that underway in the medium to longer term. Part B is about getting Crown Lands management framework in order. And there's a number of things there that we have to do in the short term. Part C is about looking at the existing licenses. I'll talk about the latent and expired ones in the next slide. We also have to review all the existing licenses and see what needs to be done to bring them up to best practice standard. And finally, file management was these older operations. A lot of the information just could not be located, and so we've got to make sure that in future we make sure Crown Lands has that all those documents in our system as well as wherever else they're required. Next slide, please.
Just one more minute, Danny.
Yep. So just quickly on the land-based pit quarries that we're now working to develop termination plans for these in consultation with the regional office, the councils and the licensees, and sometimes the council is the licensee. And we also have to look at future options for each site. How are they going to be managed into the future? What can be done with that land? Next slide, please. This is the last one. So as far as councils, look out for information on improvements to the approvals framework over the next few years. In the meantime, if you do have to assess a new modification or a new licence or a new development consent, please engage with Crown Lands Regional Office and the Coastal Unit just to make sure that that's going to be compatible with any new policies that are under development. The latent licence and expired licence closeouts may trigger council compliance on associated processing sites that are not on Crown land. There might be DA's applications for remediation works. And again, we'll need to engage with you on what to do with those sites into the future. One more slide, which just has the web link to the report. If you want to access that, I'll put that in the Q&A section when I'm finished here. Or you can go to the Marine Estate Management website, search for commercial dredging best practice, and under the overview section, you'll find that link. That's it.
Great. Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Jillian. And I'll just direct your attention to the Q&A because you have at least one question in there. And now it is over to David Kirby.
Thanks, Thomasen, and morning, everyone. Yes, I'm David Kirby. I'm a Senior Policy and Project Officer in the Crown Lands Coastal Unit. And as Danny said, we in the Coastal Unit, we're leading 3 projects under MEMS, the commercial dredging best practice, this one on responsibility for breakwaters, and the Coastal Crown Land guidelines. But we also support a bunch of other projects that other agencies are leading, and it's an important part of MEMS in general is that the whole strategy enables collaboration across agencies and across levels of government. Yeah, we'll be taking all that work forward over the next remaining years of the strategy. My talk this morning, just now, I'll just share my screen, is on one of these projects, which we're just, it's a relatively new project, but it's not a new issue. Looking at basically breakwaters, and by which I mean everything from sort of armoured harbours all the way through to say training walls and other hard structures along Crown waterways and on the edge of Crown land. I should probably just clarify what we mean by Crown land. Well, Crown land Actually, about 40% of New South Wales is Crown land, but most of that is in Western New South Wales. Of interest to us is at the coast, is that coastal Crown land includes sort of most beaches and seabed below mean high water mark, all the way out to 3 nautical miles, plus a load of foreshore reserves as well, and other parcels of Crown land along that way. So there's quite a lot of land, coastal or submerged, that we're responsible for managing. So this project, like I said, it's a new project, but an old issue. It's basically trying to look at all these legacy breakwaters that are on our coasts, so rock walls, concrete walls, geotextile sandbags, etc. Now, the work that we're doing with Crown lands is very much building on work that's gone before in the first stage of MEMS, which was led by DPI Fisheries. And they've published this audit of trained river entrances and so on. That the audit's available online, as is quite a useful tool for looking at these structures, a tool called Breakwater Reporter. Now, they identified these 134 significant structures, but there's actually quite a lot more as you progress upstream. And in the coastal unit Crown lands, we're interested in structures as far as the upper tidal limit. Now, all these structures, some of them may serve many purposes, but if they've been there a long time, they may no longer really be fit for purpose, or they may actually have no current purpose. They're just there. They may have had a purpose at some stage, but no longer. And importantly, the responsible authority for these structures is often unclear. Our general approach to the project then, our general aim ultimately is to reduce risks to public safety and community and environmental values by improving the management of these structures. So first stage obviously is we've got to identify what they are, get out and assess their condition, prioritise them for further work, and then get them into asset management frameworks so that we can actually manage them going forward. So rolling this out, we're essentially, like I mentioned, building on the statewide audit that's gone before, but we've also been contacting councils directly to get council officers to identify structures within their LGAs. And an immediate sort of priority is to establish clear criteria to determine responsibility. So the purpose, the history, who benefits from the structure, and so on. I mentioned the need to assess these structures, so we're looking at both sort of rapid assessments that we can do from site visits with a camera and a drone camera as well, but also developing proper engineering assessments for structures that have been prioritised for that kind of work. And then, as I mentioned, I'll come to later, get these into asset management frameworks. Just an example of what's out there. This is quite a large structure just south of Caves Beach off Lake Macquarie. Was built in the late 60s as the first part of a deep water port that the rest of it never materialised. So it's been there quite a while. It serves no purpose whatsoever, but it has generated this quite nice beach here. Essentially functioning as a groin, but you can see the seas punching through in various places, and if you go for a scramble along it as I've done, you can see it's very degraded. The rock that's been used isn't really heavy enough anyway, and its height is about 2 meters below what it would have been at the time of construction. But so it's big, it's there, but as I say, it doesn't necessarily serve any particular function at this stage. Another example, in this case, the responsibility is fairly clear. This is on the northern side of Port Stephens, the Tarley Boat Harbour, built in the 1830s. Current land is, for about 100 years, it's been owned and managed by the Tarley Bible College, and they're still there. So yeah, I never thought I'd come across a breakwater managed by a Bible College, but there is at least one. And they also have an Airbnb available on this location. I think you can arrive by boat and enjoy the Airbnb as well. So just interesting what's actually out there. One of the ones we are working on closely in collaboration with the Cooks River Alliance of Councils in Sydney is all this sheet metal piling along Cooks River, where there's approximately 4 kilometres of sheet metal piling that has been there since the 40s and is quite quite degraded. So we're working out who's responsible for what and commissioning sort of interim safety works, and ultimately I think that'll be probably replaced with more appropriate structures, but also feeding into their coastal management program is an important aspect. So yeah, what we mean by asset management frameworks, well, basically the major infrastructure is licensed to the Maritime Infrastructure Delivery Office, which is these days part of Transport for New South Wales, so it did used to be part of Crown Lands. But as you can see in this map on the right, this is the Swansea breakwaters. The red line marks out where their responsibilities are, and yeah, they manage just to the right of this line, and someone else manages to the left of this line. This is the same structure in the same place, serving the same function, but subject to management by different organisations, which is not ideal. So that's an aspect that we need to tidy up. The port authorities, and also transport, are also responsible for structures associated with bridges and roads. The port authorities have fairly clearly marked responsibilities. So that covers Newcastle, Port Jackson, Port Botany, and Port Kembla. There's a lot on council waterfronts, and so councils generally manage structures that are on or protecting coastal crown land. Sorry, on or protecting council land and council managed crown land, while crown lands will probably directly manage structures that are simply on crown land. There are also private structures out there, some of which are licensed to individuals or organisations, but some are not licensed. But also, so between a whole spectrum of trying to sort of work out, whether these are worth fixing up and really investing in, or just letting them be in situ, or spending the money to remove them, there'll be a whole suite of management actions, and we'll be trying to work out what's appropriate in all these cases. So that pretty much wraps it up. I'll just share a sign on a beach not far south of Newcastle. It's been there a while. It's got a tree growing through it, and this is referring to the sand groins there, constructed by Public Works Department. And if you can read that very bottom, it says, "Please treat your assets with care," which are wise words for all of us in this space. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, David. David, Danny and Jillian, there is another question about bioremediation methods for you. So I'll direct your attention there, and I'll hand over to Patrick Dwyer.
Yeah, thank you very much there, Thomasen. Can everyone see the screen okay?
Yeah,
yep. Thanks.
All the presenters in this section are from the Coastal Systems branch within DPI Fisheries. My name is Patrick Dwyer. I live in Ballina on Nangbal country within the Bundjalung Nation, and I want to acknowledge their ongoing stewardship of the coastal environment. Now, I've been in Fisheries Coastal Systems team for a long time, and before I became involved in the marine estate strategy work, I had about 15 years or so assessing development proposals and development applications. And that involved closely working with council. And it was generally on case-by-case assessments. And the aim was to minimise the impact of developments on fish and fish habitat. Oops, I'll just go back one. The decision-making tools we're discussing today, they're evidence-based tools to address, in a strategic way, the key threats and risks to social, cultural, economic and environmental values that have been identified in the statewide threat and risk assessment. So people have talked about that a little bit. And so our focus is on estuaries and the foreshore areas. And so I've listed some of those risks on the left-hand side of the screen, and on the right you can see some of the different reports that contribute to making up that final threat and risk assessment. Now, the tools we're talking about, they're designed to improve the coordination of the day-to-day planning and decision-making within local and state government operations. The key element is better consideration of cumulative impact of those many small activities that have previously only been assessed for their individual impact. There we go. Now, pontoons and jetties are an example that Emily Messer is going to elaborate on. And so when an individual assessment is done, you know, the impact of one structure might be acceptable. But too many structures in too small an area, and you can have a cumulative impact. And you can look at this image, you can see some seagrass impacts, and you can tick off quite a bunch of those priority threats and risks. And so estuary-wide, rather than individual assessment, is required to minimise these types of threats and risks. So following that introduction to the whole session, to start, I'm going to focus on aquatic offsets. Now, when new infrastructure or development is planned, from a jetty, like we were talking about, right through to a major highway, it's best to build it in a way that avoids impact on aquatic habitats. Now, when that can't be achieved, many environmental risks can still actually be minimised through thoughtful design and careful construction techniques. Now, some other impacts, they can be repaired or restored after the structure has been built. And it might take a proponent several different revisions to achieve the best design before seeking a development approval. Now, the aquatic offset project, it's not just about the offset of impacts to aquatic habitats that are unavoidable, those in red there. It's actually about embedding this whole hierarchy into the structure, and it's a statewide project. So many of you would be aware fisheries has been requiring key fish habitat offsets for almost 40 years. And most of those key fish habitat offsets, they're delivered by the proponent by doing rehabilitation works and generally on public land, because that's where most of the key fish habitat is located. And offsets are generally required at a 2-to-1 offset to impact ratio. And offsets are generally achieved via approval conditions for fisheries permits or development approvals, or required for a major project, as a requirement for a major project. The approach focuses on rehabilitating and then improving the protection of those habitats. And getting key fish habitats in good condition can maximise the delivery of those social, cultural and economic benefits. We've got a web page that's going to have some updates happen to it soon. One of those is going to be a short video of 3 key fish habitat offsets. And that will help council and proponents better understand how to avoid impacts on key fish habitats and how to deliver an offset. And also a project team has been working together to complete a report. And that report is about developing a better understanding of the ecosystem service values that key fish habitats deliver. And so just to use mangroves and salt marsh, for people who know me, that's my happy place. But to use those habitats as an example, over time, our knowledge of the value of these habitats has improved. So in the 70s, we knew they provided nursery habitat for fish. And then since 2000 or so, with some stable isotope analysis techniques, some other things, we've developed a better understanding of not just the nursery value, but the contribution of those habitats to production. And then mangroves and salt marsh, they have biodiversity values, birds, terrestrial species. And then we've had the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, and that really turned the minds of a lot of people to understanding the foreshore protection value of mangroves and salt marsh. And then it was actually 2011 when the term blue carbon was first coined. So most people are a little excited about blue carbon at the moment. And then the marine estate strategy work has really highlighted the social and cultural values of these habitats. And I haven't even talked about the water quality values, but all these values, and this is why we sort of talk about them as stacked values, they can all happen at the same time, they co-occur. And all those values are lost when we have an impact. And so consequently, this stacked value needs to be considered when we're doing an offset to ensure that we're getting the best outcome. Now, this project has been important for clarifying with councils and others on the type of habitats that are to be offset under either the Fisheries Management Act or habitats that are offset under the Biodiversity Conservation Act, or sometimes both requirements need to be met, because many projects span Fisheries Management Act and Biodiversity Conservation Act areas. So Fisheries and DPE OEH have been working together to develop some guidance to be released in the future. And that's so proponents, including councils who need to manage offsets, so that they have a clear path and the on-ground outcome that occurs accounts for and returns all those ecosystem values. Now, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kate Buckley, who's going to talk about marine vegetation strategies. So I'm just going to work out how to stop sharing my screen. Oh, well, that's done.
Thanks, Pat. I'll just share my screen. So good morning, everyone. My name's Kate Buckley. I'm a DPI Fisheries Manager for the Marine Estate, working out of Grafton, north of the Currents, so it's beautiful Bundjalung country. And today I'm talking to you about the intertidal marine vegetation management strategies and how these strategies can assist councils effectively manage intertidal vegetation to maintain their ecosystem values and services into the future. I'll also explain the current state of progress and let you know what you can expect over the coming months from our team. So the Intertidal Marine Vegetation Management Strategies, or IMVS, aim to develop plans to maximise resilience, accommodate sea level rise, address key threats, and facilitate rehabilitation opportunities for intertidal vegetation. So specifically, they target mangroves and salt marsh identified under the New South Wales Fisheries Management Act, which include 5 mangroves, 10 salt marsh species, and the mangrove fern. But it's worth bearing in mind that mangrove and salt marsh habitats host many other plant species, fish, invertebrates, birds, bats, mammals, reptiles, including many rare, endemic or otherwise protected species, and they can therefore provide umbrella protection for those species as well. So at the moment, the IMVS are not targeting seagrasses, as the management options for those species are quite different to that of mangroves and salt marsh. So the IMVS will help councils plan for meaningful and cost-effective management in 2 ways. First, by identifying priority sites for management where mangroves and salt marsh are likely to persist in estuaries over the long-term future, given current impacts and future sea level rise. And secondly, by identifying appropriate management strategies at these sites that can improve the resilience, recovery or protection of intertidal vegetation. Overall, this will improve the coordination of environmental and infrastructure activities, increase the uptake of best practice management actions, and improve stakeholder capacity. So, for example, the information and guidance provided by the IMVS will allow councils to incorporate evidence-based priorities for management into coastal management programs, in some cases streamline approval processes in low priority areas. And priority sites could also be used for the delivery of key fish habitat offsets that Pat mentioned in the previous presentation. Sorry, technical glitch, there we go. So the method used to identify priority sites was a GIS modelling approach that you can see on the left-hand side of this slide. So the macrophyte potential model integrates data from 2 MEMS outputs you might have already heard of. First, the mapping of existing mangrove and salt marsh communities in their current landscapes from DPI Fisheries staff Tim Glasby and Greg West. And then also using another MEMS output completed by the EHG team led by Dr. Michael Hughes, which maps vulnerability to sea level rise scenarios, including an increase in the sea level rise of 0.5 metre and 1.5 metre. And that's the blue part of the triangle on the slide. This represents the range of possible sea level rise in New South Wales for the next century or so. Data fed into the macrophyte potential model also included exposure to anthropogenic impacts such as developments, agriculture, and structures impeding water flows. So a greater macrophyte potential is expected in protected areas or environment zoned areas where intertidal vegetation occurs or will occur. And so when we can influence factors on this yellow side of the triangle, macrophyte potential might be increased. And finally, data was included on geophysical factors that might exert influence on potential management outcomes, such as elevation, slope, and geology. So from this macrophyte potential model, hotspots, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, were identified. These are areas where the model indicated that substantial areas of intertidal vegetation may persist into the long term. And the slide represents the hotspot areas of the Tweed River estuary, and you can see as the colour goes from yellow through to orange, there's a greater aggregation of high macrophyte potential. So these areas represent sites where management actions can be prioritised as they're expected to effectively protect or enhance ecosystem values into the future. So the IMVS also identify key approaches for the management of intertidal habitats at these priority sites. And as you're aware, there's multiple approaches to the management and restoration of intertidal habitats, but all of them focus on restoring the key ecological drivers of natural hydrology and sedimentation regimes. For example, through the restoration of tidal flows or controlling riverbank erosion. And this is often associated with the management of vegetation, such as the removal of weeds or rubbish, or the establishment of vegetation buffers. And these factors are also often inextricably linked back to hydrology or sediments. And finally, effective management obviously requires consideration of human use of those areas and how we plan and manage both the existing intertidal ecosystems and areas directly adjacent to them, or even further away, that are generating an influence on these habitats. So the IMVS include a lot of information, and so we've divided it into hopefully more digestible chunks that will become available on the MEMS website as they're released. The GIS methods used to prioritise sites are described in detail in the methodology report, and information on the key management approaches can be found in the document titled Risk Mitigation and Adaptation. And together, these documents support the estuary-specific IMVS that we're undertaking in close collaboration with councils. So far, we've assessed 1,571 square kilometres of the New South Wales coast, less than 10 metres in elevation, reaching from the Tweed River to Ulladulla and incorporating over 57 catchments. And within this area, 57.9 square kilometres of high macrophyte potential was identified, and 14 separate IMVS are planned. So at the moment, we're focused on preparing the Tweed River IMVS, and we'll be moving on to the Richmond River soon. And so I look forward to meeting with each council and discussing management of intertidal vegetation in your LGA as we work our way along the New South Wales coast. The IMVS profile page on the MEMS site as well, the MEMS website, will be updated as strategies progress, and it also contains contact information for myself and my team. So please feel free to get in touch about the IMVS. And yeah, thanks for listening. I'll pass you on to Emily Messer to talk about the domestic waterfront strategies and bank management strategies.
Hello, I'll just share my screen. You should be right. Can you see that now?
Yep, that looks good, Emily.
Perfect. Hello, thanks for the good presentation so far. I'm going to talk about the domestic waterfront structures strategies and the bank management strategies, which are two separate projects. So both the projects, as with all MEMS, are statewide. And as Pat discussed earlier, these two projects are moving to an estuary-wide approach. So we're having estuary-wide strategies and estuary-wide maps. For the domestic waterfront structures strategy, this is guiding landholders in the first stage of their development process, which is the landowner's consent stage. It's supporting decision makers during the assessment phase by providing consistent, thorough and defendable outputs, which are again estuary-wide and statewide. And the bank management one is providing a decision support tool that sort of steers proponents towards options of better habitat when it comes to riverbank restoration. All right, how do I skip? There you go. Cool. So I'll talk about the Domestic Waterfront Structures Strategy Project, or DWS project first. So the project aim is to develop strategies which streamline and integrate the assessment process for new domestic waterfront structures. And this is to reduce the cumulative threats associated with these types of developments. The project considers the estuary as a whole, and it considers the suitability of new sites for the new domestic structures. So to do this, we have a map, which is mapped on a lot by or cadastral lot basis, and this is mapped against legislation and policy, which is administered by Crown Lands, Planning, DPI Fisheries and Transport. And the idea is it would clearly show landholders at the landowner's consent stage if their proposal would be considered appropriate for landowner's consent, or not, or maybe there might need to be more information, or it's inappropriate site. It's done using an agreed method, which the agencies have worked together, and we incorporate council LEPs if appropriate. So basically this is having a better consideration of the cumulative impact using existing legislation and guidelines. Cool. So this sits next to a, I think I didn't skip it last time. There we go. Sorry. So this map sits next to a estuary-wide strategy. So basically this strategy, the strategy in the map, the benefits of having one of these strategies is it's a planning tool which is useful for both state agencies and councils. So the easy to use map for proponents. The preliminary assessment has already been completed by agencies. So you've got that streamlined assessment, that streamlined thing. And we have a fact sheet for the DWS, which you can incorporate some into your CMP, which we found is really useful. It can be used as a prioritization tool. So when you guys as councils are considering where to upgrade or install public facilities, you can maximize the local benefit. So you can look at a site that might be mapped large areas of red, so there can't be new private infrastructure in there. So you can see the need that there maybe a public facility would be good. And it can be used as a compliance tool as well, so to support action on illegal structures. So the status of the domestic waterfront structures strategy for New South Wales so far is we've completed, as you can see on the left, we've completed the Cape Byron, Richmond, Evans, Tweed, Shoalhaven, Lake Illawarra, St George's Basin, Barilla Lake and Jervis Bay strategies. We've got the South Coast strategies pretty much from Bateman's Bay to the border underway. They're going up to the Marine Estate Agency Steering Committee, or MASC, hopefully next week for final approval and sign off. Then those will be put on our website and the Fisheries Spatial Portal. And next we've got the Lake Macquarie, Port Stephens, Clarence Manning and Lake Conjola. So I've talked to most of the councils on the next lot of strategies. I've got to talk to Clarence and Manning councils, but for the other ones we've asked if councils are happy to put these on their website and provide a link to our spatial portal. This will help you in the DA process. You should have a clear understanding of whether a landowner's consent will be should be granted, and you can direct proponents from there. Apologies, I'm pretty sure I missed heaps of that first slide, but anyway, we'll move on. The bank management structure, the bank management strategies. So the project aims is to develop riverbank strategies that identify high risk erosion areas and then match the best treatment options at each location using a decision support tool. And this will assist councillors to coordinate actions which address erosion, again at an estuary-wide scale. So restoration and rehabilitation work is a management area where you can get really good outcomes for fish and water quality and all of those aims that the sort of TARA addresses. and there can be a bit of a tendency to use hard structures for bank erosion because it's been used before and they can work. But this project looks at using a tool which determines erosion controls that maybe have like a bit of a greener method and can have some better water quality and fish outcomes. The DST tool, which supports, which really underpins this project, is a tool that is designed to reduce subjectivity where it can and to be used over space and time. So space as in from the north coast all the way to the south, and then it's a consistent and repeatable method. And it's built in a way that prioritizes these green, these softer methods rather than hard methods. So you're hopefully getting better outcomes for the river. Supporting this tool, there are a number of documents which explain the methods behind it, how to use it, and most importantly, in my opinion, is a review of best management practice riverbank treatment types, which details each method that can be recommended and examples of how they've been used. Also of note, it's not specifically a prioritization tool, but we found that the tool has useful data that can be used as a priority process. So the benefits of having a bank management strategy, which is underpinned by this DST tool, is that it's a great planning tool. So you can prioritize erosion areas for action and investment at a catchment scale using a repeatable and impartial method. So you can have improvement in your investment outcomes. You can develop an erosion mapping database, which is really powerful to see how things have changed. And if you want to sort of nail down on a specific sort of priority. You can also have a defendable best practice recommendation, which is provided by the DST, which allows for a bit more innovation and sort of ecological bank practice management practices. And then again, we've got a fact sheet coming, which will hopefully enable you to incorporate this into your CMP. It's coming soon, so stay tuned. What we've done so far is the DST, so the decision support tool, is in the final stage of testing. We've had a workshop after the initial phase of testing, which was run over 26 estuaries, and have incorporated the recommended changes into a revised version. Most practitioners in this workshop said that they would use this tool again as part of their work and sort of sung high praise. We're in the final stage and we're hoping to have it wrapped up by the end of the year and then rolling it out and making it available to councils to be used across the board. So even though the tool is still in its draft stage, we've had 5 bank management strategies which have used the tool with pretty good outcomes and hoping to get a few more out. Also of note, we've seen a few consultants starting to use the tool to support their choice of restoration method. So yeah, it's been really good. All right, that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks very much, Emily. Thank you. So we're more than halfway through. We've got 5 presenters left and about an hour left. Next up, I will introduce Nathan Knott. Yeah, we can see that. Thanks, Nathan.
All good. Yeah, so I'll kick off with this presentation. So I'm Nathan Knott. I'm a senior research scientist with New South Wales Fisheries, and I work along with research scientist Matt Reeves, who's a young scientist who's done an amazing amount of work on several of these projects. We've got several fisheries technicians who work with us, as well as collaborations with university groups, government scientists in EHG, and many different academics that have worked on various components of these projects with us. Today, with the time I've got available, I'll touch base on threats to estuarine fish assemblages, one of the main projects we've worked on that, and one of the main programs within the review of jetty designs. I'll touch briefly on the subtidal reef monitoring and outline some of the work that we do on that, just very briefly at the back end of the presentation. So our focus initially was to focus on the Greater Sydney region and look at the threats and risk, the high to moderate threats, and sort of prioritise which one of those knowledge gaps were key to being addressed in that bioregion. We did the initial prioritisation with a lot of the aquatic ecosystems managers, fisheries ecosystems managers in that bioregion, as they were a good conduit to get a sort of on the ground sort of assessment and linkage to sort of some of the issues that councillors would be interested in, and what research would support the decision making that they needed to. So we're basing off these the TARA and then integrating that into an alignment with the marine estate management strategy. So the first study I'll talk about was this one that we were looking at cumulative threats and trying to assess that to predict seagrass loss and the flow-on effects to fishes. We selected seagrass because it's exposed to many different priority threats here that you can see on the TARA, many of them high to moderate to high sort of threats. So there's a diverse range of stresses that can put pressure on these systems, as many people know who are attending the workshop today. We use Pittwater for the case study because it's a location with a lot of different activities going on within it, as we see in many of the estuaries along the New South Wales coastline. It also has very sort of dense beds around the place, and historically of Posidonia and Zostera and the like. So it was in terms of the asset that we're interested in, it had high sort of abundances as well. The sort of pressures that we looked at were those key priority pressures: the foreshore development, the numbers of jetties or the jetty area, the mooring density, seawall area, the hardening of that foreshore. We looked at stormwater and catchment runoff. We used the point source distribution from the various stormwater inputs around Pittwater. We used the heavy metal sediment contamination that was available. One of the other things about Pittwater too is it has excellent seagrass mapping from a fairly long period of time. So that enables us to assess seagrass loss. We looked at things like the ferry terminal, the commercial vessel usage, and we were able to incorporate some of the commercial fishing data and shore and boat-based recreational fishing data. So we had these multiple pressures that we could bring together to assess their effects on seagrass. When we use this cumulative effects score, we ended up with this sort of a distribution, with the red areas being the ones with high multiple stresses and the blue areas with less so. It should be noted that this is something that many groups around the world are trying to deal with currently. No one's clear on how you assess these multiple stresses, and as Pat mentioned in his talk, it's really key to understanding the context that these activities are going on. Often we've got to make decisions about one-off activities and permit one-off structures, but the context that they're in is really important. Fortunately, this is just a really early stage scientifically in terms of developing this sort of an approach. So we followed Ben Halpin's approach, which was developed in 2008, to address this cumulative approach to it. So what we wanted to look at is, if we did this, did we see sort of responses in the marine environment? And this figure here shows the change of Posidonia australis across Pittwater in relation to the cumulative effects scores. And what we see is this sort of situation that above a cumulative effects score of 4, going on to 8, we were seeing massive declines of Posidonia australis in that. And this is one of the first studies that actually has linked cumulative pressures to an actual degradation of the marine environment. So what's important about this research is, if we can get this up and running and sort of assess it across several different estuaries, we might then be able to roll it out as a tool where we may be able to provide some sort of guidance for what the number of stresses might be within an area that may cause environmental damage or could be acceptable. Now, it's interesting that many groups, I think, within state government and local government, give knowledge of this cumulative pressure issue, but I don't think there's a great deal of guidance in there. I think Western Australia's got some really specific quantitative estimates on how much of an activity they'll permit or structures within a certain section of shoreline, but the quantitative measures for many other places around Australia aren't there to provide guidance for the decision makers. So we're hoping that this will somehow lead the way to develop some sort of a tool that may help or enhance decision making. Moving on to a sort of smaller scale specific impact that around the jetty features, but looking at it across a whole estuary, in this case the Port Hacking estuary that we used as a case study. We went on to look at the sort of features that the various jetties might have that may enable seagrass to continue to be in an area, and things that we can potentially look to improving through time in terms of what we permit in terms of jetty designs. Again, we were looking at seagrass here, and specifically this boating infrastructure component, because there's quite a few high threats related to seagrass, and Posidonia australis is a threatened species. The features that we looked at here were things like jetty width, jetty height, the material, and the orientation. We also looked at the presence of pontoons or floating berths, which seem to be becoming more and more, floating berths in particular, becoming more common in estuaries. So looking at the results that we had for this sort of an area, what we ended up with is with Port Hacking, we used a rapid assessment technique where we were able to visually inspect the presence of Posidonia australis adjacent to the jetties, and then look at underneath the jetties. And if the occurrence or the cover of the seagrass was approximately 10% of what it was adjacent, we considered that present. So it was a conservative approach that we took, but it enabled us to sample a lot of jetties. In Port Hacking, there's 923 jetties that were identified, and we're able to sample about 300 of those, 350, and I think it's about 200 that had seagrass adjacent to them from the sample that we were able to take. So when we look at these, we end up with a situation where the wooden jetties, these sorts of jetties here, they had about 25% of the 200, so about 50 still had seagrass underneath them. That's Posidonia or Zostra. When we went to the mesh type jetties, these ones here, we only had limited numbers. There were only 11 across Port Hacking compared to the 200 that we were able to sample in Port Hacking. We saw there was 50% occurrence of seagrass still remaining underneath these mesh jetties. So it's sort of indicative that there's this approach looks like it has real value for giving seagrass a chance to survive. And if there's an opportunity to move a jetty from, say, a timber jetty into a mesh jetty in future, that's something that we'd like to assess through time to see if it enables an opportunity to recover, the seagrass to recover. This is a figure of the probability that seagrass will be found in an area against jetty width, and you can see a jetty between 1 metre to 1 metre 20 will have about a 75% likelihood of still containing seagrass underneath it. But when we move to about 1.8, which is about the industry standard, there's a lot of jetties clustered in around about that size in the Port Hacking estuary. We see it drops below to about 30%, and then you continue to go wider, and the likelihood of seagrass being found underneath the jetties becomes negligible, or 25% or less. Under the pontoons, we found no seagrass, so the pontoons excluded enough light over a large enough area that we didn't see any seagrass underneath the pontoons. And similarly, the floating berths was the same story. Looking at light, one of the key drivers for light under the jetties was jetty height. So this is above mean high water. If you get up above 1 metre of the mean high water, you're cutting out 50% of, you're allowing 50% of light to get through. But if you can get up to 1.5 metres, you're getting up around 60 to 70% light penetration, which increases the probability of seagrass being retained in that area. So So yeah, so that hopefully we'll get that work written up and published. We're doing sort of sampling in other estuaries to assess how general these patterns are for the various jetties and jetty types, and yeah, we'll be able to provide some sort of guidance for decision making around future jetty designs to improve the likelihood of seagrass and recovery of seagrass in some cases. We do a whole range of other projects around the Marine Integrated Monitoring Program for the marine estate. So we do the subtidal reef monitoring. So that's a well-established program that we do across the Greater Sydney and the whole New South Wales coastline. So there I can provide links. Hopefully we'll have a dashboard up next year that local councils would be able to look to their adjacent sort of coastlines to look at how the condition of the fish assemblages are developing through time. We're developing an estuarine fish monitoring program, but that's very early stages. There's much more complexity with sampling the fishes in those estuarine systems. And we do a lot in Initiative 4. So we're addressing the Initiative 2 issues, but we're doing that across a couple of different initiatives as well, working closely with the Initiative 4 on a range of projects which relate back to Initiative 2 outcomes, and they're listed here. And we're also working Initiative 7, where we're reviewing the offshore effects of large vessel anchoring. We've developed in conjunction with the port corporations and EHG, we've been able to develop a new anchorage plan for Port Kembla, and we've gone on to quantify the ecological effects with large vessel anchoring. And I'll finish it up there and ask for questions to be directed to the Q&A session in the talk.
Great, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, I think you already have one comment, so have a read when you've got time. All right, thanks again, Nathan. Now we're over to Scott Nichols.
Hi, everyone. Share my screen. I can see you, Thomasen. Is that showing up?
Yes,
in
almost.
Presenter mode now?
Yes, thanks, Scott.
Is it presenter mode's on? Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's Scott Nichols. I'm a Senior Fisheries Manager with DPI Fisheries. I'm based up on the North Coast at Wollongbar, which is just inland of Ballina. It's Widgeable Wyable country, which is still part of the Bundjalung Nation. My project is Reconnecting Fish Habitats, which is under Initiative 2, Management Action 4. So these are, hopefully that's come up okay. These are some of the fish that we're interested in. Whereas Nathan's was sort of talking about the estuarine fish, I'm more interested in those ones that occur within the freshwater zone. Some of these, the reason that we're trying to improve connectivity for fish is that all fish need to move at some stage within their life cycle. Some of that might be for localised movements, such as oxley and pygmy perch, which are very localised within the Wallam wetlands along the coast. Others undertake local movement solely within the freshwater zone, such as the eeltail catfish and Macquarie perch. But then you get other fish that do quite large scale migrations, such as eels, which live in the freshwater and go up to the Coral Sea to breed, or Australian bass, which live in the freshwater and go down to the lower estuary to breed. Similarly, the endangered Australian grayling does the same. It's not only the adults that need to move, juveniles also need to move, particularly for those ones that have been bred in the estuarine environment and then need to make their way upstream. They're the ones that are often the most impacted by any barriers within a river system. So for all fish, barriers are bad, take-home message. When we talk about a barrier, we're talking about something that crosses the river perpendicular to flow. So those couple of middle pictures there are images of weirs, which have a purpose of water storage or sort of management for irrigation, that sort of thing. Other structures such as road crossings may not be constructed in a method that allows for appropriate fish passage. So you can have pipe culverts, which are quite bad,
elevated culverts, which create a waterfall effect on the downstream side. So those fish that are trying to move from the estuary up to the freshwater zone against the flow, they come up against these even small rises of a structure and they get blocked. So at that stage, they're at risk of increased predation. If there's numerous fish blocked in a certain area, they become in close contact with each other. Disease transmission is increased, and in the worst case scenario, localized extinction can occur because they can't do their breeding cycle. So we don't, the image that's on this slide here is taken from our fish passage database. So you can see it's sort of like a death of 1,000 cuts across a number of these waterways, and the impact along the coast is quite extreme, where you have a number of road crossings, in particular in this region, which can affect fish passage. Back in 2005, we did a road crossing audit, trying to capture as many of these structures as we could. We don't have all of these structures, so if any of you come across a structure that either is not on the database copy that you have, or you think it's just a new one, please get in touch and we can add it to the database, or work with whoever's put it in place to undertake remedial measures. Complementing that, we also undertook a detailed weir review, which assessed as many of the structures as we could find across the state. That was statewide. Road crossing audit started along the coast, but also extended statewide. So from that process, we prioritised sites based on their effect on the environment. Also their use, owner willingness, and value for money if the structure was to be improved. That gave us a list of high, medium, and medium and low priority sites. What we're using within, or trying to address within, the Reconnecting Fish Habitats program are the upper priority sites, so the high through to medium priority sites. A lot of these structures by nature are complex in terms of land management or water management, and so they're often very long-term projects over a number of years. It's rarely a quick fix, but that's a good thing. Within the MEMS program, we've got a couple of years to try and work towards fixing up some of the priority structures. So the MEMS program, this action's been running since 2018, and this is one of the structures which we were able to address up on the Richmond River. It's Cook's Weir. The top two pictures there show some historical images of the impact of the weir. So the top middle picture is actually taken from a postcard. I'm not sure why the weir was on a postcard, but it's not in a publicly accessible area, but it shows that there's a bit of recreational use in terms of people boating, but it also shows that there's a waterfall effect on the downstream side that fish wouldn't be able to migrate up against until there were some flooding flows. In the 1970s, the weir 13 kilometres downstream, which is the town weir for Casino, was raised. So that ended up making the Cook's Weir pretty much defunct. It wasn't actually serving any purpose. So the water level between the upstream downstream wasn't great. But as you can see by that flow pattern in the middle of the weir there, the fish still needed to fight against a high velocity barrier through that little channel until the water level came and submerged the weir as a whole. So the weir itself was owned by Water New South Wales, and we worked with them to remove that barrier. This is a sort of a central barrier of what were 5 barriers along the main stem Richmond River. There were 2 downstream of J-Bore Weir at Casino that were removed also under different projects. This one was removed as part of the MEMS. Upstream of this is Kyogle Fishway, which has Kyogle Weir, which has a fishway on it now. So that just leaves one of 5 along the main stem Richmond River to address for the future. On the smaller scale, but still a good impact in terms of improving fish passage within a small catchment up on the Brunswick River, up on the north coast here. We worked in partnership with Byron Shire Council and funding through the flagship fish habitat grants to replace a causeway structure with a bridge. So that removed the waterfall effect that the fish needed to migrate against, opened up the channel and allowed for free passage for fish to move through. Brunswick River was is one of the catchments that's been highly affected by a number of road crossings that crisscross the river through a narrow valley. Byron Council have been very proactive and working towards redressing a number of those structures. So again, this crossing was in the middle of upstream and downstream improved structures, and so it by addressing this one allowed for 25 kilometres of habitat to be opened up to in the lower estuary up to near the village of Upper Maynarm. Up at, if you can just see, there's a little orange dot up there. That's the next one on the cards for us. It's again a redundant structure, but need to work through a few issues to get that addressed. Those 2 projects are things that we've completed. We've got a number of projects in the mix at the moment. Stroud Weir and Liverpool Weir Fishway refurbishments. Stroud Weir is in Mid Coast Council area on the Cooroo River, and Liverpool Weir is at Liverpool Council area on the Georges River in Sydney. They both have fishways on them currently. Stroud Weir was a natural rock ramp fishway that was done back in 2009. So we're improving that to bring it up to contemporary best practice, so that the hydraulics within the low flow channel, which is that centre line of water movement that you can see on the picture on the left, the cone-shaped baffles are all prefabricated. They're all literally set in stone, and the hydraulics of those can be understood and managed throughout the fishway. In a natural rock ramp fishway, the variability of the natural rock and the impacts of flooding flows can affect water movement and the hydraulics that are present there, and that can affect fish passage. Liverpool Weir, which is the top right picture there, has a vertical slot fishway. Can't really see it in this picture, but it's in the foreground. Vertical slot fishways are great, they work, but this one's been sitting there for a number of years, and the baffles have started to deteriorate, so we're working to address that. Down on the south coast, we're also working on another road crossing barrier with Shoalhaven Council to replace that with a bridge. And also up in the north coast, we're undertaking some fish monitoring to see how fish move through an existing prefabricated rock ramp fishway at Kyogle. How you guys can be involved is get in touch with myself or some of our assessment team. If you don't already have a copy of the database, it's soon hopefully going to be up on the fisheries data portal, spatial data portal. We can liaise together, work out if it's in the structure that you're wanting to work on is in the database. If not, we'll look at how we can insert it in there, look at the priority setting, and then work to include it in your CMP so that can get some funding or co-funding along with any other contributors. Thank you, Thomasen.
Great, thanks, Scott. You've got a question actually, which you may have just answered, but just go check it out.
Yep.
And also Nathan has a couple more questions in there too. All right, 3 more presentations to go. Over to you, Jan Gill.
Hi, everyone. Can you see that?
Yeah, looks good. Thank you.
Thank you. So My name's Jan Gill. I'm a Principal Policy Officer in the Water Group of the Department of Planning and Environment. I'm based in Coffs Harbour on beautiful Kumbangia country. And I'm going to talk to you about the Coastal Floodplain Drainage Project. So the focus of this project is primarily on the impacts of agricultural drainage on the marine estate. And the drainage systems I'm talking about were largely established by government 50 to 100 years ago, even longer in some places, to remove surface water and groundwater and keep out the high tides, to encourage agriculture to develop on those large floodplains. There's an example there of the Richmond drainage network, which is fairly extensive. And there's increasingly urban development in those drainage areas as well. And also the infrastructure obviously is ageing. So just a couple of examples of what the drainage infrastructure looks like. So on the left is a large floodgate barrage with a road across it. So it's a fairly big structure. And on the right is just an example of a smaller floodgate. And the agricultural community is, as I said, dependent to some extent on this drainage network. So there are community expectations about maintaining the drains and the floodgates and other structures that are part of this network. So the other aspect to this is this, so that the threat and risk assessment identified water quality impacts from those structures and networks, but also the social and economic impacts of regulatory complexity. So our project was set up to look at both those things, and just very simply, approvals for drainage works are administered by local governments, so development approval in areas that are mapped as acid sulfate soil risk areas, and also SEP areas, by Crown lands, so DPE Crown lands, where works are on Crown land. There's also, under the Water Management Act, controlled activity approvals and fisheries permits. So it can, in some instances, be the case that a number of approvals can be required for works. In terms of the water quality impacts that were identified through the threat and risk assessment process that ended up establishing this project, it's basically acidic water coming from those acid sulfate soils, and then during bigger rainfall events, black water, as a number of other factors contribute to deoxygenation. So there's a couple of examples of those here, acidic water at the top and a black water event below. So our project objectives are just to improve the regulatory framework for coastal agricultural drainage works by finding ways to address the complexity and the time and costs associated with the approvals process or the approvals requirements, and also reduce the impact of these works and activities on downstream water quality, aquatic ecosystems, and the communities and industries that depend on those downstream aquatic ecosystems. And to do that, we've got an interagency working group that I lead with planning, Crown lands, environment and fisheries, and we've been working together. The areas that our project focuses on is those large floodplains between the Tweed and the Shoalhaven that are shown here on the map. But our project outcomes could apply to any drainage works on the coast. And this map also shows the councils that we consulted with in 2020 to try to understand the issues for our project. So also we consulted then with agricultural groups, so sugarcane, macadamias, New South Wales farmers, so representing the grazing and other types of agriculture, some environmental groups and some Aboriginal groups. And we published What We Heard, which is on our website. And since then, we've been working together as an interagency working group to analyse and categorise the issues that came out of that consultation and come up with options related to the regulatory regime to meet those water quality and regulatory complexity objectives. So we've finalised that options report and it's been signed by the Minister for Water and we're hoping to release it before Christmas. It's just going through the MEMS governance process at the moment. Basically, the options broadly fall into two groups. So ones that would just work with the existing approval requirements across the different agencies and local government, and options that would assist applicants with that and also councils. And then there's a more radical set of options that would require change to legislation. So in terms of benefits to local councils, it depends on which options are implemented, and it's too early to say which options will be implemented, but it could include guidance material for assessing applications for works, including works where there's flood mitigation or environmental protection aspects to it, and also guidance material that relates to the interaction between LEP requirements and various SEPs. Some education and general assistance to applicants to explain what's required, including development consent and other approvals. And we would hope to achieve water quality improvements by improving compliance with those regulatory requirements. So our next step is, as I said, we're hoping to publish the options report in early December, and then we'll open it for comments. We'll run a webinar just to explain the process and in broad terms what the options are. And we will also hopefully meet with any stakeholders who are interested, including councils, starting from early in the new year. So yeah, we'll be coming to see if you'd like to engage with us on this project. And I should also say that there are, we recognise that there are non-regulatory options for addressing those water quality impacts. They're not within the scope of our project, but yeah, we certainly recognise that in the Northern Rivers, for example, there was funding announced to do some clearing of drains and floodgates, and so those projects are working alongside ours. And I've put some contacts there. That's our water inquiries email address. So if you have any questions about our project, please feel free to contact us.
Thank you very much, Jan. Thanks, Jan. That's great. Thanks for your questions, everyone. Please keep them coming. We've got about 15 minutes left where you can submit your questions and we'll do our best to answer them. And next up, we have David Kirby. Again. Great, we can see that, David. Thanks.
There we go. Sorry.
Right, yes, hi again. So I'm just introducing the Coastal Crownland Guidelines. I've just put my name here so that you've got me as a contact person, but there's a cast of thousands within Crownlands and across the other agencies that have really contributed to the exercise of developing these guidelines over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. Now, just to sorry, there we go. Quick reminder that when we're talking about coastal crownland, what we mean is beaches, foreshore and headland reserves, most estuaries, including coastal lakes and lagoons, and the seabed out to 3 nautical miles. Now, across those, the coastal crownland, we actually have quite different management arrangements in place. Some are directly managed by Crownlands, but often the Crownland is actually managed by the council as a designated Crownland manager. But it's not just councils as well. There can be other organisations that, or indeed individuals that can be Crownland managers. And we're actually trying to get encourage more local Aboriginal land councils to become Crownland managers as well. And then there are also Crown roads. Now, the on those lands, we have different types of tenures. So we have leases, licenses, and easements, essentially. So leases for occupation, licenses for infrastructure and activities, and likewise easements for infrastructure and assets. And again, there's different asset management frameworks that I referred to previously, with the major coastal infrastructure licensed to Transport for New South Wales, whereas other assets are managed by Crownland managers or directly by ourselves. And again, as mentioned before, there are structures out there for which there is no obvious responsible authority. Now, the Coastal Management Framework for New South Wales has been sort of carefully developed over time and is largely constituted by these acts. So the Coastal Management Act 2016, the Marine Estate Management Act 2014, and the Fisheries Management Act 1994, all supported by the State Environmental Planning Policy, Resilience and Hazards of 2021. It also has these other aspects, the Coastal Management Manual, coastal management programs developed by councils, the New South Wales Coastal Council, and a lot of the funding, the main funding body is through the Coastal and Estuary Grants Program. Now, our Act, the Crownland Management Act of 2016, is not sort of officially part of the Coastal Management Framework. And so the point of these guidelines is to essentially articulate how we administer our Act in the context of the Coastal Management Framework. So what they do is that they essentially integrate our processes and legislative requirements with that Coastal Management Framework. They guide the decisions that we make on tenures and other approvals, but they also communicate how all Crownland managers meet their legislative requirements and how they respond to issues as they arise. What they effectively do is to consolidate a lot of existing policy. They pull it all together into a single document that summarizes all the important aspects. It's not actually new policy, but it does try to, as I say, pull together everything that that matters to sort of guide folks on existing policy. Now I'll share a link in the Q&A, and I can also point you to our webpage for all the detail. But essentially, the guidelines are spelled out in terms of these 5 principles, and then quite a lot of detail underneath these principles. So I'll just talk briefly through each of these. The first principle is that the Crownland management should align with coastal management programs. So the intent of the Coastal Management Framework is to ensure that coastal management programs, development of which is led by councils, that those are the primary sort of documents that pull everything together and say how coastal land is to be managed. And so we're essentially saying here that we will fit in with that process. That is the our clear intent. So as far as possible, we'll get coastal crown land management captured in coastal management programs. Now, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Crown Lands will lead all the actions in that CMP that pertain to coastal Crown land. We might lead some, councils might lead others, and we'll probably collaborate across all of them. But it does essentially give primacy to CMPs as the main management planning documents. The second principle is that when we're issuing tenures over coastal Crown land, so leases, licenses and easements, that we factor in the coastal hazard risks in those locations when we issue those tenures. So what that effectively means is that we'll seriously consider what the flood risks, the sea level rise risks in particular locations are, and use that to maybe help determine how long leases and licenses should be issued for, if you like. That's a key aspect for our business. The third principle is that the coastal protection works on coastal Crown land on the open coast. There's a preference that they be low impact or non-structural wherever this is feasible. And that was also emphasised in one of the earlier talks as well, a general preference away from hard structures if possible. Related to that is the fourth principle around private structural coastal protection works, again on the open coast, where we're emphasising that they need to be located within the boundaries of the properties that the works are intended to protect. There are several examples where this hasn't been the case, and in some of those cases we're requiring private landholders to move the coastal protection works off Crown land and onto their own land to protect their own properties. So yeah, just keeping in mind that the whole point of Crown land management is to deliver public benefit. And then finally, the fifth principle is around non-commercial dredging on coastal Crown land, and that's just emphasising that should be in the broader public or environmental interest. And quite what that means is spelled out in a bit more detail in the guidelines, but it includes things like the principles of, if possible, using what is dredged in one location, maybe using that for beach nourishment if that is required within the same sediment compartment. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at those guidelines. Like I say, I'll put a link in the chat to them. Oh, and no, just finally to mention how this fits in with MEMS, because I think this fits really well. This is essentially what MEMS Initiative 2 is trying to achieve: coordinating investment in on-ground environmental activities and infrastructure management, improving coordination across agencies, increasing stakeholder capacity and knowledge, and increasing the uptake of best practice. And I think that these coastal Crown land guidelines, they've taken a while to develop, but they're out there now and they've been very carefully prepared, and I think they do actually tick all of these boxes. So we're hoping that they will prove very useful for councils and other Crown land managers going forward. So thank you for your attention. Do keep in touch. We are now moving into essentially a communication and engagement phase, just having launched the guidelines through the Coastal Conference, got it up on our website this week. But we will be contacting councils directly. We've already been contacted by the Sydney Coastal Councils group, and we'll be presenting to that group of councils at some stage over the next few weeks. And yes, so the rest of you do get in touch if we haven't got in touch with you first. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, David. You have a question in the Q&A as well.
Great.
Okay, over to you, Cara Robinson.
Wonderful. Let me know when you can see that slide.
Yes, it's up now. Thanks, Cara.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name's Cara Robinson, and I'm a Senior Policy Officer within the Department of Planning Environment's planning side, and in particular the Environment Policy branch. And I'm joining you today from Darug country, and in particular Barramuddagul country near the beautiful Parramatta River. So today I'll be talking to you about our project, which is the Coastal Design Guidelines Review, and what we've been doing, where we're up to. So I'll start with a quick overview of what the Coastal Design Guidelines Review project is, what the benefits will be broadly and also specific to councils, and then the next steps. So what are the Coastal Design Guidelines? They are a guideline that already exists. It was originally released in 2003 with the purpose to ensure that development in the coastal zones is sensitive to the natural and urban character of coastal places. And it did this by establishing coastal design principles and highlighting desirable and also undesirable practices in a range of sizes of coastal settlements. So all the way from a little coastal hamlet all the way up to a big coastal city. And importantly, the Coastal Design Guidelines have a statutory role in the planning system. So planning proposals, which are applications to change the main planning standards, like changing land uses with a rezoning, they have to be consistent with and give effect to the Coastal Design Guidelines. The guidelines apply along the whole New South Wales coastal zone as mapped under the Resilience and Hazard SEP, so all the way up and down the coast. And the coastal zone doesn't just include the open coast, but it's also estuaries to the extent of tidal influence. It includes coastal wetlands and littoral rainforest areas as mapped under the SEP. And it also includes coastal vulnerability areas where they have been mapped. As I mentioned, the guidelines are mandatory for planning proposals to do things like land rezonings in the coastal zone, but they also have a range of optional uses that we really hope councils and other stakeholders will choose to use the guidelines in. So it's council strategies, regional plans, local strategic planning statements, and also coastal management programs. And even on the scale of development applications and master plans, we're hoping the principles and best practice urban design elements in the guidelines will be useful for those purposes. So why are we updating the Coastal Design Guidelines? Given that they were made in 2003, they have become a little bit out of date over time, and there's a real need to update them and integrate them with contemporary coastal management, as well as increasing the emphasis on Aboriginal cultural heritage and management, as well as natural hazard management and place-based design. So the original guidelines are quite, they've got quite prescriptive controls in some cases, which was very appropriate at the time, but as our thinking has changed, we've moved towards a more place-based design way of thinking, which looks at the place on its own merits separate. We also wanted to make sure the mandatory planning proposal elements are very clear and discrete from the optional urban design development application guidance, so that it's really clear what's mandatory and what's optional. While we've made all these changes, we also retained the elements that we heard from our stakeholders are significant in the guidelines. So that includes having those design principles and also including case studies and desirable outcomes. In terms of what we've done so far, we undertook a review of the existing 2003 Coastal Design Guidelines, and as part of that, we consulted with a range of stakeholders, including coastal councils, on how they are or aren't using the guidelines and what's working, what isn't. And that really informed the development of a draft guideline, which we exhibited last year. We received just over 30 submissions on that, and a lot of them came from coastal councils who are in this meeting. So I really appreciate you taking the time to give us that feedback on the guidelines. We've reviewed those submissions and made updates to the guidelines where those are appropriate, and we documented all of those changes in a submission report that will be published when we get approval to publish the final guidelines, which we're hoping to publish this month. So we've prepared the final guidelines, everything's ready, and they're due for release this month. In terms of the benefits, generally, we're hoping that the updated guidelines will improve the quality of planning and urban design in the New South Wales coast, specifically by aligning with contemporary New South Wales coastal management and land use planning policies, encouraging development and urban design that reflects and celebrates the local character of coastal communities, ensuring that development protects the important coastal features and also responds appropriately to coastal hazards, and also promotes design that respects country and Aboriginal cultural heritage. And then specifically for councils, we're hoping that updated guideline will provide really robust evidence and clear requirements to support councils when they're assessing proposals in the coastal zone. So we've made those planning proposal requirements very clear and explicit. We've provided checklists to hopefully simplify the assessment of proposals. And we also have retained and updated the optional coastal urban design principles to support high quality coastal development. So as I mentioned, we're pretty close to releasing these guidelines. We're hoping to do that this month. And as well as the guidelines, we'll also be adding additional resources on the department's webpage. So we'll have those assessment checklists I talked about, and they'll be in an editable PDF, which hopefully will be very clear and easy to use for everybody. We also will include a worked example of that checklist to show the level of detail that we would hope people would use when filling it in. And we also have a range of case studies of best practice urban design in the coastal zone. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the Q&A function, or you're also welcome to send me an email or to our general coastal@planning email address. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Cara. And thank you to all of our presenters and audience. That concludes the presentation component of this webinar. Just got a couple of bits of information about where you can get more information. So, oops. Oh no, can you see that, Cara?
Yes, I can see that one.
Oh, great, thank you. Okay, so thank you again to our presenters from the Marine Estate Management Strategy Initiative 2 team. I hope you've enjoyed hearing their updates on their projects today. To find out more, we have a monthly e-newsletter. To sign up to this, there will be a link in the post-webinar email you'll receive. We also have a Marine Estate Management Strategy website, and on each of the project profile pages, there are contact details for the project leads. We have a snapshot report, and we have one of those released 3 times every year. And we also have an Instagram account. So there's some of the ways that you can get more information about what's happening. To wrap up, we have another MEMS webinar coming up in early December. We haven't quite got a date figured out, but we'll get that out to you as soon as we can. That is on the Marine Estate Management Strategy Initiative 1A. You heard from a couple of 1A presenters in the last Initiative 1 webinar, but this will give you a bit more detail on some of the 1A happenings. We'll also send out an email, which I just referred to, with links to an event feedback survey, some resources, websites, presentations, if we can fit them in. Otherwise, we can email them directly to you. And of course, that newsletter subscription link. So again, thank you very much. Thanks to all of our wonderful presenters today. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. We're looking forward to seeing you hopefully at the next Marine Estate Management Strategy Initiative 1A webinar. Hope you have a great rest of the day.